We ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute? Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
delicious?
mental?
Put in your mouth. OK. Here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa!
Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Good afternoon, it is midday. This is the live desk here on GB News. Coming up this Thursday lunchtime.
The breaking news this hour, Hamas say that the head of their national security forces, Jihad Mashin, has been killed in an Israeli airstrike, as well as members of his family, it's believed, in Gaza.
Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has just given a press conference with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. He's also been meeting the families of British victims and those still missing in Gaza. He says Israel has a right to self-defence in line with international law.
In other headlines here in the UK, asylum seekers set to return to the Bibby Stockholm barge 2 months after it was cleared when Legionella bacteria was found in the water supply. We're live in Portland for the latest.
Plus, there is a red warning, a risk to life in Scotland as Storm Babet heralds a month of rain in a day with some 70-mile-an-hour winds. The RNLI has just warned people to stay away from Scottish coasts because of the dangers. We'll have the latest on all that with our Scotland reporter. First, a roundup of your latest headlines with Rhiannon.
Good afternoon. It's 1 minute past 12. Your top stories from the GB Newsroom. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has thanked Rishi Sunak for his visit to Israel, calling it a strong statement of support. Rishi Sunak has been holding talks with his counterpart. He's on a 2-day trip to the wider region amid growing concerns the conflict with Hamas could escalate. He'll be travelling to a number of other regional capitals in a diplomatic bid to prevent the fighting from spiralling. Mr. Sunak said to his counterpart, "We want you to win."
From your decision yesterday that you took to ensure that routes into Gaza will be opened for humanitarian aid to enter, I'm glad that you made that decision. We will support it. We're increasing our aid to the region and we will look to get more support to people as quickly as we can. You describe this as Israel's darkest hour. Well, then it's for me to say I'm proud to stand here with you in Israel's darkest hour. As your friend, we will stand with you in solidarity. We will stand with your people, and we also want you to win.
Well, the conflict has now killed more than 4,900 people on both sides as it enters its 13th day. A warning some viewers may find the following images distressing. The Gaza Health Ministry says over 12,000 Palestinians have been injured in Israeli airstrikes and hundreds of thousands have been displaced. Hamas media are reporting an Israeli airstrike has killed Jihad Maisain, head of the Hamas-led National Security Forces, as well as members of his family. Meanwhile, the UN warns that life-saving aid for those trapped in Gaza is now critical. Security Minister Tom Tugendhat says Palestinians in Gaza are being exploited by Hamas.
I think we've got to recognise that the first victims of Hamas are the Palestinian people. We've seen people in Gaza over the last 30, 40 years, not just murdered when Hamas took power in 2008-9, but actually since then being exploited in the most horrific ways. We've seen children being forced to dig these tunnels that sadly have been dug across the entire region. We've seen individuals who have stood against Hamas in various different ways being murdered.
The Foreign Secretary held talks with his Egyptian counterpart to discuss the ongoing situation in Gaza. James Cleverly visited Israel last week and will travel to Turkey and Qatar over the coming days to try and seek a peaceful resolution. The UK says the three countries are vital to international efforts to uphold regional stability, free hostages and allow humanitarian access to Gaza. In other news, French President Emmanuel Macron has attended the funeral of a teacher who was stabbed in a suspected Islamist attack. Dominique Bernard was stabbed to death 6 days ago in the northern city of Arras. Macron and his wife spoke to his family ahead of the ceremony, also attended by his students, each carrying a white rose. The suspect's under formal investigation for murder, and France has been on its highest state of alert since the stabbing. Back here, asylum seekers are set to return to the Bibby Stockholm later. A number of people were taken off the barge after deadly bacteria was found on board more than 2 months ago. Food supplies have now been delivered and letters sent to asylum seekers confirming their return. The Home Office says all necessary tests have now been completed. The Met Police Force has described new facial recognition technology to catch prolific shoplifters as game-changing. In a pilot of the new software, 12 retailers provided images of 30 of the worst offenders. When compared with the force's custody shots, almost half came up as positive matches. Those offenders are now being investigated with a view to build criminal cases. The software uses biometric measures of a person's face, even if it's partly covered. An investigation has been launched into Welsh Water after the company admitted illegally spilling untreated sewage. Natural Resources Wales says it's examining the severity and frequency of permit breaches by the water company. Welsh Water says between 40 and 50 of its wastewater treatment plants are currently operating in breach of their permits. One of the worst performing plants is in Cardigan in West Wales. Greta Thunberg has taken to the streets in a protest that started outside JP Morgan in London, demanding the bank stop funding fossil fuels. The climate activist joined Fossil Free London at the entrance in Canary Wharf. It follows Tuesday's protest in Mayfair outside a meeting between oil executives, where Ms Thunberg was arrested along with 26 others and charged with a public order offence. And the Met Office has issued a rare red weather warning for heavy rainfall and severe wind for parts of Scotland. Storm Babet is forecast to cause severe flooding and risk to life from 6 p.m. this evening and through tomorrow. Angus and Aberdeenshire are expected to be the worst affected areas, with some schools closing. Power outages are expected, along with train cancellations until Saturday. This is GB News across the UK on TV, in your car on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. Now it's back over to Mark and Pip.
Rhiannon, thank you. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak is in Israel to shore up diplomatic pressure for more humanitarian aid in Gaza, as well as making clear that Britain's stand of solidarity with Israel is clear, saying the country had a right of self-defence in line with international law. When meeting with Benjamin Netanyahu in Jerusalem, the Israeli Prime Minister emphasised that the Israel-Hamas war affected the whole world.
This is not merely our battle, it's the battle of the entire civilized world. It's the battle of Israel, it's the battle of the moderate Arab countries, it's the battle of Western civilization, the battle of the free world, the battle for the future. We have here two forces. One is an axis of evil led by Iran through Hezbollah, Hamas and others that want to bring back the Middle East to the Middle Ages, to an age of bondage and war and slavery and annihilation. And the other force is the forces of progress and humanity that want to push the Middle East into a world of peace and prosperity.
Well, Rishi Sunak also met the families of what the IDF now says are at least 203 hostages still trapped in Gaza, saying, we grieve with you. The lobby briefing, we understand at number 10, has indicated that the latest assessment is that 2 Britons are still being held hostage, but 7 more are missing, underlining, of course, the importance of this latest diplomatic mission. Let's get more with Charlie Peters, our reporter who's in Tel Aviv for us at the moment. And Charlie, this sort of dual track, if you like, the support for Israel, but also the support for the families and those still missing.
Yes, and the British diplomatic mission today will be seeking to get a further understanding of steps being taken in Israel to achieve that return of those hostages. We know that there have been meetings in Qatar between Western powers who mediate with the Qataris for access into Hamas. The Qataris have a long history of mediating between terror groups around the world. More recently, they secured the release of an American in Africa with mediation there between the Americans and a terror group in West Africa, and also recently securing the release of 4 Ukrainian children between the Russians over in that war in Europe. But the situation on the ground for Britain is less clear. Number 10 is not releasing much information about how they are engaging with the Israelis on the negotiations front. The Americans have been clearer. Since 2015, they have had a presidential special envoy for hostages. It was a role established in 2015 after some anger from families over how the Obama administration handled hostages during the Iraq-Syria crisis when the Islamic State, of course, took so many Americans and indeed other Westerners hostages during that appalling brutality. So there has been a direct line of a full-time professional from the American side and their team in Israel working with the Israelis and, we imagine, mediating with the Qataris. Antony Blinken, the US Secretary of State in Qatar, also had discussions about the hostage situation there. The humanitarian situation is also a key part of this British diplomacy today. We heard Rishi Sunak talking about how he was pleased that the Israelis had agreed for aid to enter from Egypt, and also James Cleverly, the Foreign Secretary, has been in Egypt this morning meeting with his counterpart, no doubt continuing that conversation as people wait for news of when the first trucks will cross the Rafah border crossing and enter what the IDF call a humanitarian safe zone on the coast of Al-Muwazi, west of Yunus Khan.
Charlie, we are just hearing that Rishi Sunak will now travel to Saudi Arabia to meet with Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. Just explain to our viewers and listeners why this meeting is happening, what potentially it could achieve, and the role that Saudi Arabia plays here.
Well, Saudi Arabia is a key influencing nation on how other Arab nations react. It has been leading many of those conversations with the Israelis, and particularly on the Abraham Accords, also a huge link with the Americans there. And there is a great deal of concern in the West about how the Arab world has reacted to the news on Tuesday night about that hospital explosion. Saudi Arabia issued one of the most resolute statements of all the Arab nations, describing it as an appalling crime. And as American intelligence Hamas supported the Israeli version of events yesterday. All eyes are on whether or not British intelligence will do the same today. Yesterday we heard that they were working as quick as they can to establish the facts. This morning the Security Minister Tom Tugendhat said that they were waiting until they could be very clear about the situation. And I imagine there will be lots of urgent diplomacy between Western powers, and in particular Britain and the Arab region, to understand why they've had that position and if they will adapt their stance ever since the new information has come to light. But analysts in the region think that's highly unlikely. There's little room for manoeuvre for Arab nations, considering the large degree of protest sparked by those explosions on Tuesday night.
And away from the diplomacy, Hamas itself saying that the head of their security operations, Jihad Mashin, has been killed in what they say is an Israeli airstrike. No confirmation from the IDF, but clearly the targeting is underway that Netanyahu had said would take place.
Yes, and it's interesting that this claim has come from the Hamas side, where they included that not only had Jihad Mason, the head of the National Security Forces, been killed in an Israeli airstrike, but they also said that his family had been killed as well. Most of the information about those in the leadership positions, the commanders in Hamas in the Gaza Strip, has been coming from the IDF. They are making claims most mornings about senior commanders they are targeting overnight in airstrikes on the Strip. Indeed, they claim that they killed a naval commander a few days ago with a strike from their ships posted off the coast here. But for Hamas to take the initiative in their communications campaign on what the situation is on the ground is somewhat of a shift here, perhaps trying to gain an initiative as global feeling towards the bombings on Gaza has shifted so significantly since Tuesday night with that hospital explosion. They are not winning the ground war. That is quite clear with the amount of destruction. But Hamas is getting an upper hand on the information war, both here in the region and around the world.
Charlie Peters in Tel Aviv, thank you for the moment.
Well, back in London, let's get more with our political correspondent, Catherine Forster, because, Catherine, we're now getting an indication from that lobby briefing that, indeed, the Prime Minister is heading for Saudi Arabia. We were being told earlier that James Cleverly, the Foreign Secretary, will be going to Qatar and Egypt. This is a pretty intensive diplomatic push.
Yes, it certainly is. So Rishi Sunak on a 2-day visit. He will, having been to Israel, having spoken to the President and the Prime Minister, will be heading now on to Saudi Arabia. He will be getting back to London tomorrow afternoon. James Cleverly, the Foreign Secretary, meanwhile, left Britain yesterday. He's on a separate round of intense diplomatic negotiations aimed at getting humanitarian aid into Gaza and the release of the hostages. I thought it was really quite a powerful press conference, wasn't it, between Rishi Sunak and Benjamin Netanyahu. Netanyahu stressing how Britain fought to destroy the Nazis on behalf of the world, comparing that to the situation that Israel is now in, basically saying that Hamas is the equivalent of the Nazis, and saying this is not just Israel's fight, this is the world's fight. The world must stand together to counter this, to counter what he said, the Middle East being taken back to the Middle Ages. Rishi Sunak's response: absolutely supporting Israel and its right to defend itself within international law. That phrase being added now all the time because, of course, concerns that Israeli actions in Gaza may inflame the situation further. Now, we've learnt from the lobby briefing back here that 2 of British nationals have been killed, that a further 7 are missing but could be dead. So not good news, and we will see what unfolds this afternoon. But clearly, Rishi Sunak joining President Joe Biden, joining the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, who was in Israel on Tuesday, wanting to provide a united front, a united show of support for Israel, while also saying that their thoughts too are with the Palestinian people. Rishi Sunak said Palestinian people are the victims of Hamas as well. Very keen to stress that Israelis are not the only people suffering, and that Britain wants to get aid to the Palestinians as soon as possible.
Also, Catherine, this diplomatic mission by Rishi Sunak, he's part of the Quin, isn't he? So we're expecting President Macron to head there perhaps in the next couple of days. The German Chancellor's already been, President Biden has been. This Quin group that is trying to achieve this diplomacy.
Yes, that's right. So that group in diplomatic circles consists of the United States, the United Kingdom, Germany, France and Italy. We do understand that France's President Macron will be going. We don't know when. We don't have information yet about whether Giorgia Meloni from Italy will follow. But a feeling here, we're nearly 2 weeks on now from that horrific attack by Hamas on October the 7th that, of course, has sparked all these deaths, all this suffering and all this outrage and division around the world. The rest very, very keen for this not to escalate further and mindful, of course, about how careful they have to be. I think it's interesting that although President Biden came out yesterday and indicated that the United States believes it was not Israel behind the attack on the hospital, Britain hasn't said yet who they believed carried out that attack. They've been very careful to say that British intelligence services are looking into that. They will make it public when they feel that they have a definitive answer. And Security Minister Tom Tugendhat was stressing that and the need to be very careful with assumptions made and with language used.
Political correspondent Catherine Forster, thank you.
Well, of course, the emphasis of much of that meeting with Rishi Sunak, the humanitarian aid, while hospitals in Gaza say they are at breaking point, a lack of medical supplies, water and, most importantly at the moment, fuel for their generators, making an already dire humanitarian situation much more perilous.
On Tuesday, an explosion claimed the lives of what are thought to be hundreds of civilians at the Al Ahli hospital in the north of Gaza, with conflicting reports still on what happened and who could be to blame.
Well, joining us now is the Vice Chair of the Hospital's Administration Group, Father Fadi Diab. Thank you very much indeed, Father Diab, for joining us here on GB News. To ask you first, how is the hospital coping? Because we do have these reports that all of the hospitals are running very short on fuel for the generators.
Thank you for hosting me. Well, the medical situation in Gaza is devastating. Our hospital will resume, of course, work in the coming days, but the situation is very horrible after the blast the day before yesterday. The whole situation, the whole humanitarian situation in the Gaza Strip is on the edge. Hospitals are running on fuel and they won't be able to run like tomorrow. And the life of many patients, Palestinians, injured people, children, women are at the stake. And I think I've been listening to your news and watching the visit of the Prime Minister, and I think it is very important that the leaders of the world put more pressure on the state of Israel to stop this war rather than to continue it. And lives are at the stake. We need to protect life at this time. We need to protect life. We are called as leaders of the world, whether religious or political, to put an end to this war. This cannot go on. There are many children and women in Gaza who need protection. These people who were killed at the hospital, in fact, were running away from harm after their buildings were bombed, and they were sheltering in the hospital. They couldn't find any other place. And if hospitals are now places that are not safe, it's very dangerous for everyone in Gaza.
Yeah. Can we establish with you the situation at your hospital? Because clearly the intelligence services of many countries are trying to establish exactly what happened. But we understand that the main hospital building itself, including the operating theatres, are still intact, that you're still able to use that main building.
We are still able to use the buildings. 3 days ago, Our radiology section was hit by a missile and caused damage to the radiation room and the diagnostic room. This is actually a new section that is added to help cancer patients. The buildings are not severely damaged. There is, of course, damage from the blast, but the explosion occurred in the yards of the hospital where people were gathered and hoping that this is a secure place, but eventually it was not. And that is why the other buildings of the hospital are intact, and they will resume work soon.
Can I just ask you, Father, about the water supply? Because I've seen, perhaps misinformation here and there. The suggestion was that Israel controlled the power plant, and that's been cut. Does Hamas have control over water supplies?
Well, I am not a spokesperson for Hamas. I don't know that.
No, but as you understand it.
Yeah, I don't know that. What I know from the people on the ground is that they have no drinkable water. And according to the World Health Organization, the water in Gaza is undrinkable. I think it is very important to know that the Gaza Strip has been under siege for the last 16 years. That Israel controls everything. It controls water, electricity, what goes in, what goes out. This is a human crisis from our people on the ground. This is a human crisis. As a clergy, I call upon the international community to stop this war. This cannot go on. I mean, more and more civilians, innocent people will die in the coming days as we witness what is happening in Gaza.
And Father Diab, can I ask you about the medical staff in your hospital? Because clearly they have had to work round the clock. They have very few supplies now. But I guess that it's the psychological impact of what's occurred that's they're having to cope with and carry on regardless.
Well, the psychological impact is devastating. I mean, everyone is devastated. I just called the administrator at the hospital, and she's in shock.
Yeah.
This is a director who's been working there for the last 40 years. She's in total shock. Our staff is in total shock. The people of Gaza are in total shock. In fact, we in the West Bank, far away from that danger, we are in total shock. What is happening is unimaginable. This cannot go on. This should stop in one way or another.
Yeah, can I ask you the very fact that you are there in Ramallah, away from Gaza, because we've seen pictures, of course, of the protests in the West Bank. We've seen pictures of protests up in Lebanon, in Beirut. How difficult is the situation from your assessment there?
Well, the situation is very difficult. People are very much frustrated. People are very much devastated from the pictures they see on social media around the clock. People are very angry. They're very angry of what is happening in Gaza. They're very angry of the Western world. They're very angry of the humanitarian, organizations. They're even angry of their own government. They're angry with their own leadership.
Father, just one final question. We do know that there is some aid that will be allowed through, hopefully, fingers crossed, tomorrow. Do you know how that aid logistically is going to get to you? How it can get to you safely without getting into the wrong hands?
Well, I think it is really important to know that what Israel has allowed so far, according to the news, is 20 ships of of aid. It's not even medical. 20 ships only to the south of Gaza. Our hospital is in the northern part of Gaza. That means that nothing will be delivered to the northern part of Gaza. And I think this is not acceptable. We need humanitarian aid to all the people of Gaza to all the victims of Gaza, to the hospitals, to the clinics, to the displaced. Until now, there has not been enough agreement that the supplies, the aid gets to all the people who need it in Gaza.
Father Fadi Diab, the Vice Chair of the Al-Ahli Hospital, thank you very much indeed for joining us and sharing your thoughts here on GB News. We appreciate your time.
Well, do stay with us here on GB News. We're going to be going to Portland in Dorset, where migrants are set to board the Bibby Stockholm accommodation barge. Stay with us.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the dinosaur hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sunday, the 29th of October at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa!
Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Welcome back. It's 12:31. I'm Rhiannon Jones. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. Rishi Sunak has welcomed the decision to get some aid into Gaza from Egypt. The Prime Minister's in Israel, where he held talks with his counterpart Benjamin Netanyahu, as well as President Herzog. Netanyahu thanked Rishi Sunak for his visit, calling it a strong statement of support in a time of darkness. The Prime Minister will fly to Saudi Arabia later, where he'll meet with Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. Speaking earlier, he told Netanyahu, "We want you to win."
I welcome your decision yesterday that you took to ensure that routes into Gaza will be opened for humanitarian aid to enter. I'm glad that you made that decision. We will support it. We're increasing our aid to the region, and we will look to get more support to people as quickly as we can. You describe this as Israel's darkest hour. Well, then it's for me to say I'm proud to stand here with you in Israel's darkest hour. As your friend, we will stand with you in solidarity. We will stand with your people, and we also want you to win.
The conflict has now killed more than 4,900 people on both sides as it enters its 13th day. A warning some viewers may find the following images distressing. The Gaza Health Ministry says over 12,000 Palestinians have been injured in Israeli airstrikes and hundreds of thousands have been displaced. Hamas media reporting an Israeli airstrike has killed Jihad Massain, the head of the Hamas-led National Security Forces. And the Met Office has issued a rare red weather warning for heavy rainfall and severe wind for parts of Scotland. Storm Babet is forecast to cause severe flooding and risk to life from 6 p.m. this evening and tomorrow. Angus and Aberdeenshire are expected to be the worst affected areas, with some schools closing. And you can get more on all of those stories by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
For exclusive, limited edition and rare gold coins that are always newsworthy, Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2124 and €1.1482 euros. The price of gold is £1,609.59 per ounce, and the FTSE 100's at 7,525 points.
Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Rhiannon, thanks. Welcome back to the live desk. Let's just update you on what Rhiannon was telling us there about the storm. We are now being told that the Brechin area and surrounding areas in Scotland are being evacuated as the storm approaches. We had this red warning from 6 o'clock tonight instituted, but it does appear that conditions are worsening. We will be getting an update with our reporter there at the scene, but the Brechin area and other areas being evacuated as we speak. We'll update you with the latest details as they come through.
Now, Rishi Sunak has told the Israeli president that he has a duty to restore security to your country as he meets with senior Israelis on a diplomatic mission to Israel.
The Prime Minister also telling Benjamin Netanyahu that he welcomes the progress being made on humanitarian aid to Gaza.
The Palestinian people are victims of Hamas too. And that is why I welcome your decision yesterday that you took to ensure that routes into Gaza will be opened for humanitarian aid to enter. I'm glad that you made that decision. We will support it. We're increasing our aid to the region, and we will look to get more support to people as quickly as we can.
As the Prime Minister speaking earlier in Israel, he's on his way now to Saudi Arabia. We have the Foreign Secretary, we're being told, who'll be visiting Qatar, Turkey and Egypt, with the hostages perhaps at the head of that list in terms of getting more support in negotiations. Well, let's get the latest with our political editor, Christopher Hope, who can join us. Because, Christopher, the lobby briefing, we gather, has given an update on the numbers involved, the number of Britons involved in this.
That's right. In all, 16 British nationals affected by this dreadful crisis in the Middle East so far, Mark. Of that, 9 are known to have died. A further 7 have died, 9 are missing. Forgive me for that. And confirmed now that we have 2 British nationals held hostage. The remaining 7 of the ones who are unaccounted for could be held hostage, although some will have died. So the focus right now moving in Israel to how can we get these British hostages out. And there's been talks this morning already between Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister, with the Israeli President Herzog about how they can help. We know later on that the PM is flying to Saudi Arabia to meet Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, and maybe possibly a third country after that. He's back in the UK tomorrow. So all efforts now to try and help, as well as support the aid effort in Gaza, and also deal with the issue of the UK hostages held by Hamas in Gaza.
Christopher, President Biden, we know he is the one who had the most diplomatic clout, if you like, when he went to Israel yesterday. What extra clout, if any, I guess, can Rishi Sunak bring?
I mean, we mustn't underestimate the value of the UK on the world stage. We are one of the permanent members of the Security Council. That's to give us a huge value, and we are known to have a good relationship with the US. As things stand, as of the 11:30 a.m. briefing here in London, Mr. Sunak has not spoken to Mr. Biden, who of course is on their way back to the US right now. But we have a role we can be a facilitator. We can talk to allies of both the US and UK in the region, and clearly it looks like we're trying to use third countries to try and talk to Hamas about the release of hostages. We know now there's 203 hostages held by Gaza, and what happens to them next is really important and vital. We also now know there's £10 million of UK aid sitting very near the Rafah crossing. The UK government is right now trying to find ways to get that aid into Gaza, whether through its Rafah crossing when it opens or through other third routes, we're told by the government this morning.
Indications too that President Macron may be part of this diplomatic whirl, if you like. Is this an indication that this is a last attempt to get these things sorted before perhaps this ground offensive starts in Gaza?
It seems that way, doesn't it, Mark? That the global community, particularly those with seats in the Security Council, are trying to show they support Israel. The key language, though, is working within the confines of international law. Now, I asked the government, how was that defined? It's clearly about limiting any civilian casualties, because as soon as that starts to happen in any ground offensive, then support for Israel could start to leach away, even in the international community. So they've got to show that they are doing their best to protect civilians. But when those casualties start to mount up, as will probably happen, then it gets difficult and harder for Israel's ally to defend the country.
Chris at Westminster, thanks very much indeed for updating us there.
With us now is Gideon Levi, a journalist at Israeli newspaper Haaretz. Good afternoon to you, Gideon. Thanks for talking to us on GB News. Benjamin Netanyahu meeting with President Biden, today meeting with the British Prime Minister. How much store does he hold by what they will have to say? Telling him, you know, that Israel has a right to defend itself, but in line with international law. How much will Mr. Netanyahu be listening to those words, do you think?
First of all, with all the respect, there is a difference between the British Prime Minister and the American President. Sorry. Israel was never in this fragile situation like now. And never was it so depending on the United States on really basic needs like now. And therefore, I think no Israeli prime minister would be able to ignore a friendly offer or a friendly advice from the American president. Now, Israel has a record of violating the international law throughout the years. There is not a day that Israel is not violating the international law in the occupied territory. But I guess Israel will have to restrain itself this time because the president asked it in person. But, you know, things can also get out of control, and I'm very, very concerned to what will happen when this, if and when this ground operation will get on its way.
And just in terms of the offensive operations, if we can use that term, we had this announcement from Hamas that its head of security forces, Jihad Massin, had been killed in an Israeli airstrike. No confirmation from the Israeli side, as we gather from the IDF.
Not that I know, but I didn't follow it so carefully. There were assassinations of Hamas commanders, and there will be more, I'm sure. But unfortunately, this is not the whole story.
What is the whole story at the moment? Because clearly we were thinking at the beginning of the week that the offensive would be fairly imminent, and here we are at the end of the week, still no definite news.
So first of all, the IDF is preparing itself, and I guess there can't be any surprise attack in any case, and therefore time is, and all this supporting Israel, so time is not so crucial like it was before. But time is crucial for the population of Gaza.
Yeah.
I mean, by the time we are talking now, hundreds of thousands of people are in unbelievable conditions. unfortunately, most of the Israelis are not exposed to the scenes in Gaza, but I can tell you what I see is really horrifying. And it's time when we speak about the land operation, about the stuff of Israel, about the barbaric attack on Israel, we cannot ignore at the same time this horrible, horrible stuff of the people of Gaza, with over 1,000 children being killed only in the last 10 days or so, with hospitals which stop functioning, with fear, with homeless people. I mean, I cannot even describe it in words. And we better put attention now also on this.
Yeah. Gideon, thank you indeed for balancing that view and, as you say, another aspect to the story. Gideon there from Haaretz, the Israeli newspaper. Thank you very much.
Plenty more to come. You are with the Live Desk on GB News. Stay with us.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to ordinary people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only three people you can trust in life: your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle. Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's my new
It's
teeth.
your new teeth. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is two new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christys, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News and GB News Radio.
welcome back to the live desk. Let's update you on this breaking news now of evacuations in Scotland as Storm Babet threatens to breach blood defences. Those warnings coming in from officials. That red warning, the Met Office warning, danger to life, of course. The RNLI also warning people in Scotland, stay away from the coasts because of the treacherous conditions.
Yeah, there's new warnings coming in as well for parts of northern England, Midlands and Wales because of the risk of flooding. Well, our GB News Scotland reporter, Tony Maguire, is in Brechin, where we believe locals are being led to safety. Tony, tell us what the latest situation is.
Good afternoon. The situation seems to be getting worse and worse here. And again, I'd like to remind everyone that the official red weather warning hasn't even come into play yet. We're expecting that at 6 o'clock this evening. But already today, I've been on back-to-back calls with SEPA and with Angus Council in the last hour. And indeed, we think the final number is yet to be officially put out. But somewhere in the region of 360 homes are expected to be evacuated as the rivers keep rising on the River South, Esk and North. Now, we know that yellow warnings and orange warnings have been in place here as well for wind, with up to between 60 and 70 miles per hour gusts. I can tell you that I've already been through one umbrella today already, and the rain has been non-stop. When that red weather warning, which has now been extended as far down as Dundee and Tayside, came out, the wording was exceptional and persistent. Now, that's as good words as to describe it, and I've been here in Brechin since 7 o'clock this morning. This is, of course, right in the heart of this red weather warning zone, and residents must be thinking close to the rivers, how much worse can it get?
And Antonio, we can see that wind gusting, but we assume that the evacuation orders are for those nearest to those rivers with the amount of water that's coming down at the moment.
Yes, that's correct. I've kind of been keeping an eye on the river, and some of the, anyone who was tuning in this morning would have seen just how close some of those houses built on the bank of the River South Esk are. And certainly, as I said, 360 properties could end up being a conservative estimate, but there are a lot of homes here before the hills in Brechin start moving up. Now, we know that Brechin Community Hub is preparing to accept members of the public and those facing evacuations as the teams and resilience teams from the council and volunteer groups prepare to inform people of where to go. Right up at the top of Brechin, the community hub will be welcoming people. They're advised to bring sleeping bags, and then later on we'll hear more about what the plans are tomorrow. Of course, Brechin itself has quite a formidable flood defence system, and yet the SEPA on the call earlier this morning have pretty much said that the way things are going and the way that the rain is expected to come down here hard and fast, that those are almost certainly going to be breached.
Come as a surprise to you, Tony, but we are now hearing that red weather warning is being extended in Scotland. It's being extended further south to include parts of Dundee and Western Tayside.
Yes, that's correct. And I mean, certainly this entire region of Scotland, the northeast of Scotland, is known for its particular bad rain. If you remember, even back a couple of weeks ago, we saw Fife and Perth and Kinross battered by some quite severe flooding, although some of that was perhaps a little bit of council negligence. But nevertheless, the rain came down thick and fast, and they have already almost just only recovered from that flood defence warrant from the flooding a couple of weeks ago. Now, council offices and officials, as well as SEPA, are saying power cuts, travel disruption and so much more expected over the next 24 hours.
Now, we've been talking about the rainfall, as we can see with your umbrella, and we hope that GB News umbrella holds together. Clearly, it's the wind gusting as well. We gather that ScotRail have stopped any services north of Edinburgh, and now we've got the RNLI telling people to stay away from the coasts as well.
Yes, that's correct. I didn't know about the RNLI there, but certainly ScotRail and quite a lot of services between Aberdeen and Edinburgh. In fact, most services up to Aberdeen. I believe after 5 a.m. this morning, a tree fell on the line between even Glasgow and Oban. Just to give you an idea of how far-reaching the effects of this storm are, Oban is obviously over on the west coast of Scotland, while I'm here in the east. And certainly, I think the advice from SEPA, as it was from Angus Council earlier this morning, seemed to be stay at home unless you're advised to move out, and then to not panic and move in an orderly fashion to one of the community hubs in the Angus Council and region.
OK, Tony, thank you for updating us there. Stay safe, of course, and we'll update people as we get more, as Pip was saying, that red warning now being extended.
We also just want to take you back to Israel, because although the main focus is on this Israel-Gaza conflict, there are heightening tensions on that northern Israeli border with Lebanon. And the US Embassy is now urging its citizens in Lebanon to leave as soon as possible, to make plans to depart while commercial options are still available. The security situation in Lebanon has been deteriorating and is being monitored extremely closely. Yeah, I'm just wondering if we can bring up one of our live pictures. That we did have a feed there from the border of northern Israel and Lebanon. We had seen some smoke there earlier, indications perhaps that there were more rockets coming through. I don't know if we can get that picture. Anyway, the latest we're getting from the US State Department is that they've emailed to their citizens saying, we recommend those who choose not to depart prepare contingency plans for emergency situations. That's the word that we're getting. Due to the unpredictable security situation, you will know that we've been reporting for you that certainly Iran was indicating it would take direct action as a result of any further situations in Gaza in terms of Israeli incursions happening. And we did hear earlier that Jihad Maisin, the head of security for Hamas, had been killed in an airstrike. This is according to Hamas themselves. No confirmation from the IDF. And clearly he is one of the senior figures in the Hamas superstructure. So there are developments on both sides of the border there. Do stay with us here on GB News for the very latest. You're with the Live Desk.
Hello. Storm Babet will continue to bring some exceptional weather over the next 24 hours. A rain warning remains in force across eastern Scotland, where that rain will continue to push in. This is the area of low pressure that's associated with Babet. It stays anchored to the UK for the next couple of days, and the red warning remains in force where we've got this weather front. And you can see it persisting across eastern Scotland through much of Thursday evening, continuing to push in. You can see from the colours it's heavy and it's persistent across the country. Elsewhere, we will see rain starting to become more widespread across northern and eastern England, drier down towards the southwest, and a mild night across the board. Now, we've got weather warnings in place across much of the country, particularly northern and eastern areas. We'll continue to see the wind feeding that rain in, gusts of 70, possibly a touch more over the coasts and hills. But it's the rain then that we start to focus on across northern England as we head through Friday. An amber warning has just been issued from the Met Office for parts of the Pennines, northern counties of England into Yorkshire. To the south of it, we'll see some sunny skies, but that'll spark off some heavy downpours through the afternoon. Again, temperatures staying mild across the board. And it stays unsettled as we head into Saturday. Further warnings are still in place, but the rain intensity by this stage will begin to ease. We'll still continue to see some showers, though, pretty much anywhere across the country. Slightly drier by Sunday, but further unsettled weather next week. Bye-bye.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
This time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh!
No, thank you. My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sunday, the 29th of October at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christys, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa!
Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Good afternoon, it's coming up to 1 o'clock and this is the live desk here on GB News. This is what we've got for you today.
Latest in the Middle East, Hamas says that an Israeli airstrike has killed the head of its national security forces, Jihad Maisin, as well as members of his family. It's believed that took place in Gaza, as we see the latest explosions there on the skyline. And the US Embassy has just started to urge its citizens in Lebanon to leave as soon as possible because of the deteriorating security situation there.
I grieve with you. Those are the words of the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, who's in Israel meeting the families of British victims and those still missing in Gaza. In talks with the Israeli president, Rishi Sunak says his country, Israel, has a right to self-defence in line with international law.
Back in the UK, a coach carrying asylum seekers on the Bibby Stockholm has arrived in Portland. We'll have the latest for you as they say it is now safe for those asylum seekers.
And several hundred families have been ordered to get out, to go to safety. This evacuation order has been ordered in Brechin in Scotland. Storm Babet is barrelling in. Residents there, we are with them. We'll have the latest after your headlines with Rhiannon.
Pip, thank you. Good afternoon. It's just coming up to 1 minute past 1. Your top stories from the GB Newsroom. Rishi Sunak has welcomed Israel's decision to allow humanitarian aid into Gaza from Egypt, including £10 million worth from the UK, ready to enter. The Prime Minister's in Jerusalem, where he held talks with his counterpart Benjamin Netanyahu and President Herzog, who criticised the BBC's coverage of the conflict. He's accused the corporation of a distortion of the facts. Netanyahu, meanwhile, thanked Rishi Sunak for his visit, calling it a strong statement of support in a time of darkness. Mr Sunak will fly to Saudi Arabia later, where he'll meet the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. Speaking earlier, he told Netanyahu, "We want you to win."
I welcome your decision yesterday that you took to ensure that routes into Gaza will be opened for humanitarian aid to enter. I'm glad that you made that decision. We will support it. We're increasing our aid to the region, and we will look to get more support to people as quickly as we can. You describe this as Israel's darkest hour. Well, then it's for me to say I'm proud to stand here with you in Israel's darkest hour. As your friend, we will stand with you in solidarity. We will stand with your people, and we also want you to win.
Well, the conflict has now killed more than 4,900 people on both sides as it enters its 13th day. A warning some viewers may find the following images distressing. The Gaza Health Ministry says over 12,000 Palestinians have been injured in Israeli airstrikes and hundreds of thousands have been displaced. Hamas media reporting an Israeli airstrike has killed Jihad Hussein, head of the Hamas-led National Security Forces. Security Minister Tom Tugendhat says Palestinians in Gaza are being exploited by Hamas.
I think we've got to recognise that the first victims of Hamas are the Palestinian people. We've seen people in Gaza over the last 30, 40 years, not just murdered when Hamas took power in 2008-9, but actually since then being exploited in the most horrific ways. We've seen children being forced to dig these tunnels that sadly have been dug across the entire region. We've seen individuals who have stood against Hamas in various different ways being murdered.
And the Foreign Secretary held talks with his Egyptian counterpart to discuss the ongoing situation in Gaza. James Cleverly visited Israel last week and will travel to Turkey and Qatar over the coming days to try and seek a peaceful resolution. The UK says the three countries are vital to international efforts to uphold regional stability, free hostages and allow humanitarian access to Gaza. In other news, French President Emmanuel Macron has attended the funeral of a teacher who was stabbed in a suspected Islamist attack. Dominique Bernard was stabbed to death 6 days ago in the northern city of Arras. Macron and his wife spoke to his family ahead of the ceremony, also attended by Bernard's students, each carrying a white rose. The suspects under formal investigation for murder, and France has been on its highest state of alert since the attack. Back here, coaches of asylum seekers are arriving. They're returning to the Bibby Stockholm in Portland. A number of people were taken off the barge after deadly bacteria was found on board more than 2 months ago. Food supplies have now been delivered. Letters had been sent to asylum seekers confirming their return. And the Home Office says all necessary tests have now been completed. The Met Police has described new facial recognition technology to catch prolific shoplifters as game-changing. In a pilot of the new software, 12 retailers provided images of 30 of the worst offenders. When compared with the force's custody shots, almost half came up as positive matches. Those offenders are now being investigated with a view to build criminal cases. The software uses biometric measures of a person's face, even if it's partly covered. Greta Thunberg has taken to the streets of London in a protest that started this morning outside JP Morgan, demanding the bank stops funding fossil fuels. The oceans are rising, and so are we. The oceans are rising, and so are we. The climate activists joined Fossil Free London at the entrance to JP Morgan in Canary Wharf. It follows Tuesday's protest in Mayfair outside a meeting between oil executives where Ms Thunberg was arrested along with 26 others and charged with a public order offence. And an evacuation order has been put in place by Angus Council for all residents in the town of Brechin in Scotland. The Met Office has issued a rare red weather warning for heavy rainfall and severe wind for parts of Scotland. A new amber warning for rain has been issued for parts of northern England, the Midlands and Wales. The British Geological Survey has warned Storm Babet could cause potential landslides. It's forecast to cause severe flooding and the risk to life as well from 6 p.m. this evening through tomorrow. This is GB News across the UK on TV, in your car and digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. Now it's back over to Mark and Pip.
Rhiannon, thank you. So, Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has been in Israel meeting Benjamin Netanyahu and Isaac Herzog, the President, saying that the UK would stand by Israel in its darkest hours. The Prime Minister has been speaking to reporters, answering questions as to why he was in Israel.
This important time, first and foremost, to express my solidarity with the Israeli people after they've suffered an absolutely horrific terrorist attack by Hamas. I've had good, productive conversations with both Prime Minister Netanyahu and the Israeli President Herzog. Among other things, we discussed the importance of this conflict not escalating regionally and the importance of getting humanitarian aid into Gaza to help people who need it. I also had the opportunity to meet families of British nationals who have been taken hostage. We're doing absolutely everything we can to get them home, and from here I'll be travelling to Saudi Arabia to build on the engagement that I've already had with leaders from across the region.
On humanitarian aid, are you concerned about the rising number of civilian casualties in Gaza and the humanitarian crisis there?
We've been consistently clear that it's important that aid goes into Gaza. Earlier this week I announced an increase in the aid that the UK is providing. We're working closely with countries, particularly Egypt, to make sure that that aid can get to those people as quickly as possible. I was very pleased and I welcomed Prime Minister Netanyahu's decision yesterday to provide for access for things like food and water and medical supplies into Gaza. Our job now is to play a role in making sure that that happens as quickly as practically possible.
Would you support an Israeli ground invasion of Gaza if that is what Israel decides to do?
Yeah, I've been consistently clear that Hamas has perpetrated an absolutely appalling, barbaric act of terror which has taken the lives of so many and caused untold misery and suffering. Israel has every right, given that, to defend itself in line with humanitarian law, make sure that it can try and recover hostages and ensure the security of its people, not just today but for the long term, so that something like this can never happen. But I also know, and President Herzog had said, that Israel will take every precaution to avoid harming civilians. But we have to remember that it is Hamas, the terrorist organisation, that embeds itself in the civilian population, and they should be held accountable for that.
A ground invasion isn't just risking civilian casualties in Gaza, it risks sparking wider conflict around the Middle East. So is defeating Hamas worth it at all costs, even if that means wider regional conflict?
Hamas has perpetrated an absolutely barbaric act of terrorism. I'm sure many people will have seen the videos. They are horrific. They chill you. They certainly have done that to me, and everyone can see that they represent pure evil. And it's right that Israel exercises its right to self-defense. It has not just the right to protect its citizens, the duty to protect its citizens and ensure that something like this can never happen again. It's important that the conflict doesn't escalate regionally. That's why I'm talking to as many people as I can across the region. I've already done that, and I'll be able to see more people in person on this trip. No one wants to see this conflict escalate, and indeed the UK has sent various military assets into the Mediterranean to prevent regional escalation. So some of our surveillance aircraft, for example, are ensuring that arms shipments don't find their way to people like Hezbollah.
The Israeli military yesterday showed what it says is proof that they were not behind the bombing of a hospital in Gaza. The Americans, through President Biden, said that they agreed with that assessment through their own intelligence. What is the British position on it?
I mean, the first thing to say is all of us who have seen those scenes would have been deeply saddened and shocked by them. We mourn the loss of all innocent life, people from every faith, every nationality who have tragically lost their lives. But I think the situation reminds us all about the importance of not jumping to conclusions in an incredibly sensitive situation. It's important that we take the time to establish the facts, of what happened. As I said in Parliament, I met with the chair of the Joint Intelligence Committee. Our own intelligence services are conducting their independent analysis of everything, and it's right that we let them get on with that.
So that analysis is ongoing, and you still don't have a final judgment either way?
As I said, it's important that we take the time to establish the facts. I met with the chair of our Joint Intelligence Committee, and they are in the process of looking at all the evidence, reviewing the facts available.
Prime Minister, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Rishi Sunak there speaking in Jerusalem, saying it was important the conflict did not escalate regionally, as he was indicating he's now going to Saudi Arabia to meet Mohammed bin Salem. Let's get the thoughts of our political editor, Christopher Hope, who can join us. Christopher, as well as that, we've got the Foreign Secretary, of course, going to Qatar, to Egypt, to Turkey. This is a really intensive diplomatic round, if we can put it that way.
Definitely. Of course, the Prime Minister is flying off to Saudi Arabia tonight and maybe a third country after that, back in the UK tomorrow afternoon, using all the diplomatic tools they've got to try and make sure there's no escalation. In that clip there, he used the term escalation twice. No need to escalate regionally. I thought that's fascinating. For the first time that he talked there about, we have got these RAF planes monitoring arms shipments to Hezbollah to the north to try and avoid any escalation up there. And also they're doing all they can, the Israeli government is doing all they can to help British nationals get out of Gaza if they want to, and also deal with the hostage crisis that's emerging as we speak there. So I think we've got the first remarks there from why our PM is in Israel. They want to get aid into Gaza as soon as possible. We do know from the lobby meeting this morning there's £10 million worth of aid sitting near that Raqqa crossing to the south of the Gaza Strip, and that needs to get into Gaza as soon as possible.
Christopher, just bring us up to date with what we know about the situation regarding British nationals, those held hostage and those who are missing and have lost their lives.
Pip, that's right. There are 16 who are missing or dead. Of those numbers, we know that 7 have died. A further 9 are missing, 2 of whom we know for sure are now being held hostage by Hamas in Gaza. The remaining 7 is not clear. Some will have died and some will be held hostage. The UK has confirmed this morning they are talking to other countries to try and help ensure that those British hostages can be released. Of course, the nature of Israel and the nature of this swift attack by Hamas meant that a lot of countries have a lot of their nationals being held hostage in Gaza, and that's why there's a big international effort to get them out, make sure they are not held any more than they need to be. But it's a very, very difficult time for the families. We know the PM has met with one family yesterday. That's a family of an Israeli national held by Hamas, and then today he's been meeting with families of 2 British nationals held in Hamas. We haven't been given their names, and that's probably for good reasons, because of course in these difficult situations the government must maintain their anonymity if they can, to make sure it doesn't escalate and put at risk those being held.
What's the feeling, Christopher, on how the Prime Minister has handled this? Many are saying he has been very statesmanlike here, and also brave, I guess, like President Biden, to go into a war zone.
Yeah, I mean, it is brave to fly to Israel. Israel is under constant attack. It's protected by the Iron Dome above Israel. He's, of course, been in Jerusalem. Yes, he's showing he's good on the world stage. That's what he's good at. He works hard. He reads his briefs. When he's fully briefed, he really is on top of his brief. I experienced that at the G20 with him in Delhi last month. I think we are seeing other world leaders fly out there. We think French President Emmanuel Macron is going, the German Chancellor Schulz, of course, Biden, on the way back to the US. These are the world powers who are members. Many of them are members of the UN Security Council. They are trying to show support for Israel. But the key point there is how this invasion goes, assuming it happens, into Gaza. Israel has got to exercise restraint in terms of civilians. They would lose, I think, rapidly global support for what they're doing if that goes wrong, and that's why I think that has been stressed both to the Israeli President Herzog this morning, as well as the Prime Minister Babet Netanyahu. It's really important not to risk needlessly civilian lives as this invasion progresses.
Chris in Westminster, thank you very much indeed for that. But let's go to Tel Aviv now and speak to Charlie Peters, our reporter there. And Charlie, just looking at the very frantic nature of all this diplomatic activity, also the fact that the US has urged its citizens in Lebanon to leave as soon as possible. Are we getting an indication perhaps that all this is taking place to clear the decks, if you like, before any kind of ground offensive in Gaza?
Well, that news from Lebanon of US nationals being urged to leave as soon as possible is a very significant moment in this conflict, as the regional powers around Israel are struggling to contain the level of protest erupted by the explosion at that hospital on Tuesday night. It has left the Arab powers very limited position to maneuver, since they all came out in condemnation of what they said was an Israeli strike on that hospital. But very little information released to support that version of events, whereas more compelling but not yet conclusive evidence released from the Israeli and American side since then. Very interesting to hear Prime Minister Rishi Sunak there not yet confirming where British intelligence and the British state stands on this particular issue, still taking a look at what is going on there, reaffirming the statements made to GB News this morning by Security Minister Tom Tugendhat. But people leaving the region is a sure sign, I think, of the remainder of the plans to launch that ground invasion onto the Gaza Strip. That convoy remains in the south, and it is still being sustained, and the ground is still being shaped by the Israeli Defense Force for that likely ground invasion. The incidents on Tuesday did give pause for consideration that alternative options may be considered. Lieutenant Colonel Richard Hecht, an IDF spokesman, also said that other options may be on the table, but the feeling in Israel is that he might have said that to distract from the communications on the day, on Tuesday when he made that statement, because the news was wall-to-wall with images of destruction in Gaza, but for a brief moment all people were talking about was Richard Hecht. But still, that convoy is in the south, and they are facing an increased skirmish in the north with the border with southern Lebanon. So the situation is escalating there, and there have also been significant developments in Iraq and Syria. Last night we heard reports of American troops being evacuated from an airbase in Al-Assad airbase and Al-Hira after a drone strike, likely by Iranian proxies, caused a traumatic brain injury on US personnel. This morning there are unconfirmed reports of Lebanese Hezbollah or a Iranian-aligned proxy group launching missiles at another US base in northern Syria. Obviously, these bases have been crucial for launching American air power on ISIS targets for the last decade. So those are significant developments as the region continues to hot up and more pressure is being put on US and coalition forces in the region. And that move for US citizens to evacuate from Lebanon, clearly an indication of where this is all heading.
We are also hearing, Charlie, that Israeli airstrike has killed the head of Hamas's national security forces. That's quite significant, isn't it? And how big do we know that top tier of Hamas to be?
Well, they do have several military commanders, but the intensity of the leadership in Hamas is great. Obviously, it's one of the most densely populated parts of the world, and trying to track down that leadership is a significant challenge for Israeli intelligence. But a lot of Israelis also, especially within the security establishment here, talking about the need to also target the Politburo of Hamas. 4 of the 21 members of that political cabinet have, the IDF claim, been killed. But a significant challenge they face is that so many of the targets they want to capture or remove are in Qatar, are outside of the Gaza Strip. So all they can do really is focus on those remaining in the Gaza Strip, and that presents a serious challenge to the Israeli mission here. How can they fully defeat Hamas as a military and political entity if so many of its leaders and indeed its actors are based elsewhere and being supported so heavily by Iran, of course?
Yeah, and we reflect, of course, that we've got James Cleverly, the Foreign Secretary, we understand, heading to Qatar, as well as Rishi Sunak heading to Saudi Arabia, all part of this jigsaw, if you like.
That's right, and the Qataris will be a significant step for one of those main ambitions for Rishi Sunak, which is the diplomacy with regards to hostages. The Qataris have been a major mediator for hostage releases between militant groups and terror groups that often maintain representation in Doha. We can remember, of course, that the talks between America and the Taliban took place in Doha for a long period before the fall of Kabul to that regime. And so people are flocking towards Doha for conversations with Qatari mediators, gaining that diplomatic insight into the situation in Hamas to try and continue talks for the release of those hostages. Because if diplomacy fails, the fight to retrieve them militarily will be extremely intense. unbelievably dangerous and possibly impossible, with the situation with tunnels and booby traps and suicide bombers. Some of the violence seen during the last ground invasion in 2014 was unbelievable, and so the fear is that such an incident again with some 203 hostages would prove to be a significant challenge, perhaps a challenge too far for the IDF.
Charlie Peters, GB News' reporter in Tel Aviv, thank you. And we can show you live pictures of the Gaza skyline, where Israel says it has hit hundreds of sites in Gaza over the last 24 hours or so. At the moment, it is looking quiet, but for how long? You're with the Live Desk. Stay with us.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to ordinary people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only three people you can trust in life: your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle.
Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's my new teeth.
It's your new teeth.
I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is two new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christys, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Well, welcome back to the Live Desk with these reports that a coach carrying asylum seekers to be accommodated on the Bibby Stockholm barge has now arrived in Portland. Still, local residents, of course, opposed to that, who've been getting these various opposition gatherings. And the issue, of course, most recently, Legionella bacteria found in the water supply on board the barge.
It's more than 2 months since the barge, which can hold up to 500 people, well, was essentially shut down. So let's speak to our South West of England reporter, Jeff Moody, who's at Portland Port. That coach arrived about 1 o'clock, Jeff. Good afternoon. Do we know how many people are going on board this time?
We don't. The Home Office is being very tight-lipped about it. There were 39 people that arrived last time. We think it's going to be something similar. We've had one coach today, and we're told that's it. No more coaches today, but there should be one tomorrow as well. So however many people were on the coach, we couldn't tell because the windows were all blacked out. They're now on board the Bibby Stockholm, settling in. The reaction they got when they arrived, they got a protest here at the port from the Stand Up to Racism group who welcome refugees, just don't think that they should be on the barge. They've got all sorts of welcome packs. They were handing out flowers and welcome packs that contain notepads, emergency helplines, that sort of thing. But there was an unexpected protest today, one that none of us could have predicted. Just Stop Oil managed to halt the bus as it was coming along the beach road onto the Isle of Portland itself. They managed to make the bus stop to a standstill. The police managed to fairly swiftly move them out of the way, and the bus carried on with its journey. But as you say, that
Oh, Jeff.
Did you? You just watched it, did you? OK. Well, there's people here saying that there were no police around. I saw in the pictures that I saw that there were police there that managed to stop them. But they're now on the barge, as we say, settling in. There was all sorts of issues, of course. This has been going on since April. This is the several attempts to get them on board. There's been all sorts of legal challenges, as we know, in the last few months since August. The most recent one from Caroline Parks, who's the mayor down here, who put in a legal challenge saying that planning permission wasn't in situ. Planning permission wasn't as appropriate as it should be given those circumstances. The High Court very recently chucked that out, said that she hadn't produced her evidence in time and that they weren't going to count it. And so here we are today, when they're now back on board. For how long, though, we don't know.
Yeah, we've just seen one of the pictures of the bus that's arrived there, Jeff, and clearly, as we've been hearing, still voices of opposition on both sides of the divide. But are we getting an indication about how many other buses, how many people could be transported there, despite the Home Office, as you say, staying tight-lipped on the issue?
Well, I mean, there could be anything up to 500, but we're told that that's not going to be likely to happen this year. It's going to be a gradual adding of people. They're going to put a few into the mix, see how they got on, see how things go, and then try and add a few more in afterwards. So I think that's generally the way they're going to go about it. It'll be a few at a time over the next few weeks and months.
Jeff, what reassurances are there for people boarding that this barge is safe, it is secure? Because, of course, as you were saying, there was the problem with the Legionella bacteria back in the summer.
Well, the Home Office has said that the problems with Legionella have been sorted out. They're saying that they've now tested the water several times. I mean, this happened fairly early on, about 2 weeks after they initially came off of the barge. With the water had been sorted out. It's worth saying that 39 of the refugees that originally came on the barge before wrote an open letter to the Home Office saying that they really didn't want to go back on the barge. They said that it was they felt very unsafe there. They said that after the perilous journeys that they'd taken to get to Britain, they didn't want to go back on the water, and they said that it had a very detrimental effect to their mental health. So whether the Home Office has addressed that particular issue, I don't know, but it certainly looks as though the issue with the water supply has been sorted out fairly early on.
Just finally, Jeff, I can't help but notice the massive contrast between the weather where you are in the south in Dorset compared to our colleague Tony Maguire who's up in Scotland. Is it really as lovely there as it looks today?
Actually, it is, yeah. It's a really beautiful day. The sun's been shining most of the day, and it's absolutely gorgeous. Yeah, it's like a little Indian summer down here.
OK, we'll tell Tony. I'm sure he'd love to hear that.
Yeah,
Not.
and in fact, we'll update you fairly shortly on that situation in Scotland, because just to update you, in Brechin, evacuation orders now in place. Some 360 households being moved to safety, but we understand one person is declining to move. We'll have the latest with our reporter on the scene. Stay with us. Latest headlines now with Rhiannon.
Thank you, Mark. It's just gone 1:30. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. Rishi Sunak has welcomed Israel's decision to allow humanitarian aid into Gaza from Egypt, including £10 million worth from the UK, ready to enter. The Prime Minister held talks with his counterpart Benjamin Netanyahu and President Herzog. Netanyahu thanked Rishi Sunak for his visit, calling it a strong statement of support in a time of darkness. Mr Sunak will fly to Saudi Arabia later, where he'll meet the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. He says talks today have been productive.
I've had good, productive conversations with both Prime Minister Netanyahu and the Israeli President Herzog. Among other things, we discussed the importance of this conflict not escalating regionally and the importance of getting humanitarian aid into Gaza to help people who need it. I also had the opportunity to meet families of British nationals who have been taken hostage. We're doing absolutely everything we can to get them home.
The conflict has now killed almost 5,000 people on both sides as it enters its 13th day. A warning some viewers may find the following images distressing. The Gaza Health Ministry says over 12,000 Palestinians have been injured in Israeli airstrikes and hundreds of thousands have fled their homes. Hamas media are reporting an Israeli airstrike has killed Jihad Hussein, head of the Hamas-led National Security Forces. 2 British nationals are still being held hostage by Hamas and 7 are still missing. In other news, back here, coaches of asylum seekers have returned to the Bibby Stockholm in Portland. A number of people were taken off the barge after deadly bacteria was found on board more than 2 months ago. Food supplies have now been delivered and letters sent to asylum seekers confirming their return. The Home Office says all necessary tests have now been completed. And an evacuation order has been put in place by Angus Council for all residents in the town of Brechin in Scotland. The Met Office has issued a rare red weather warning for heavy rainfall and severe wind for parts of Scotland. A new amber warning for rain has been issued for parts of northern England, the Midlands and Wales. The British Geological Survey has warned that Storm Babet could cause potential landslides. It's forecast to cause severe flooding and risk to life from 6 this evening and throughout tomorrow. And you can get more on all of those stories by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
For a valuable legacy your family can own, gold coins will always shine bright. Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2124 and €1.1483. The price of gold is £1,608.67 per ounce, and the FTSE 100's at 7,512 points.
Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sunday, the 29th of October at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us. From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Welcome back to the live desk. Let's just update you with what we believe is a warning being issued by the Foreign Office, calling on all Britons still in Lebanon to leave now while commercial options remain available. We've not got official confirmation on that from the Foreign Office, but it does follow this warning from the US Embassy, imploring American nationals to prepare contingency plans for what they said were emergency situations, clearly with the worry that the security situation could actually deteriorate. And as, of course, we've got the Prime Minister heading to Saudi Arabia, Foreign Secretary going to Qatar and the rest of the region. Let's get more with our political correspondent, Catherine Forster, who can update us on what's, a pretty intensive diplomatic round going on, Catherine.
Yes, it certainly is. Both Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister, on this two-day visit to the Middle East, and the Foreign Secretary, James Cleverly, who is on a three-day visit. All these Western powers united in trying to reduce the risk of this conflict escalating and spreading. We're hearing, aren't we, about real concerns about the situation to the north in Lebanon, Hezbollah, people, US nationals, etc., being urged to get out. So Rishi Sunak, having been in Israel this morning, talked to the President, to the Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, as well. Some positive messaging coming out of that. Is now on his way to Saudi Arabia, where he will talk to Mohammed bin Salman this afternoon, the Crown Prince. Now, Saudi Arabia is a really key player in the Middle East. It has generally good relations with the West, and it's very influential. And before Hamas committed these atrocities on October the 7th, it looked like Saudi Arabia and Israel we're inching towards some sort of deal, normalising relations. So Saudi Arabia's part in this is all very important. Now, there haven't been the protests in Saudi Arabia that we've seen elsewhere in the Middle East, largely because they are not tolerant of such things. But a difficult situation, Saudi Arabia has made it plain that they take a pretty dim view of Israel's actions so far. When the American Secretary of State Antony Blinken was there a few days ago, he was kept waiting for hours, then the meeting was cancelled and rescheduled until the following morning. So not an easy mission that Rishi Sunak is on by any means. But of course, they're just trying to get support for everybody to calm heads, getting aid into Gaza, getting communication, channels of communication opened up, getting people talking, and hopefully the situation not getting even worse than it currently is.
Catherine, thank you very much indeed for that. Just to update you with the situation that we understand on the border with Lebanon, that there are smoke and flames being seen on that border area. No indication as to whether it's any kind of missile strike. But as we say, the latest we're getting from both the Foreign Office and the US State Department is it's urging people to leave as soon as they can.
Now, something completely different, and you'll want to hear about this, because by 2030, 150,000 children in the UK will be homeless and living in B&Bs and other emergency accommodation. That's according to new research from the National Housing Federation. And 1.5 million families will be on the council house waiting list. That's been predicted, an increase of more than a third.
So no surprise, perhaps, that Britain is being declared to be in the middle of a housing emergency, according to a leading housing association, a theme that we did hear, of course, in Keir Starmer's speech in the Labour conference in Liverpool. Let's get more with our economics and business editor, Liam Halligan, with On the Money.
On this Bedfordshire building site, dreams are being made of a safe and permanent home. This project is led by Grand Union, a not-for-profit housing association. They're building 40 social housing units here for low-income and vulnerable families, paying below market rents. But with over 1 million households on the council house waiting list, these much-needed homes barely scratch the surface.
I think when we have 150,000 children sleeping in temporary accommodation, and it's not really temporary because some of it has lasted over 10 years, then that is an emergency. We're damaging people's futures.
For Ian and Cheryl Jarvis, social housing became their only option when their daughter Keris was diagnosed with hydrocephalus. Keris, unable to walk or talk, life in a 7th floor flat became impossible for this close-knit family.
We were paying over the odds for privately renting. So even though we had 2 wages at the time, once Keris came along, the wages started to dwindle because we were needing to be more out of work. So then you to look after the daughter because she was always in hospital visits. Yeah. So it just became too expensive. Then if we'd have carried on trying to be in the private side, we would have been probably worse off than we were. We'd been flat on our faces.
By 2030, the National Housing Federation estimates 1.5 million low-income and vulnerable households will be on the waiting list for affordable social housing. That's a third more than today. As a result, 150,000 children will be living in temporary accommodation, such as bed and breakfasts and emergency hostels. That's 6 children in every school in the country.
Essential, we can't shower any other
For Ian and Cheryl, given Keris's special needs, Grand Union has been a lifesaver.
I dread to think where we would be, if we'd be together or separated. We wouldn't, if enabled to be living with our daughter, because she needs a lot of equipment and she needs a 24-hour care. So yeah, I don't know where we'd be without Grand Union and being in this house.
Elsewhere in Bedfordshire is Grand Union's newly built Chamomile Gardens, sheltered accommodation for social tenants aged 55 plus. Jackie recently lost her leg in an accident. She says living here is a godsend, but social housing is a lottery.
This seems to be an area where some people are struggling to get anywhere and others just seem to be lucky. I don't know how other way to explain it.
With the media focused on home ownership, Aileen Evans says the need for more social housing is often ignored. But the alternative is the state subsidising vulnerable families to rent on the open market.
Successive governments need to invest in social housing. Otherwise, we will consign families to lives where their futures are stolen, and we'll have a burgeoning housing benefit bill that will cost the taxpayer far more than building social housing in the first place.
While Rishi Sunak failed to mention housing in his party conference speech, Keir Starmer put more homes at the centre of his offer to voters. This could be the issue that decides the next general election. Liam Halligan, GB News, in Bedfordshire.
Well, Liam Halligan joins us now. Liam, Rishi Sunak, you just mentioned him there in your package. He didn't make a big thing about the housing crisis, did he, in his speech?
He didn't mention housing once in his speech, and I think that was a huge miss on his part. Keir Starmer, in contrast, put housing at the very centre of his speech. But again, it was mainly housing geared towards owner occupancy, young professionals who want to buy homes, rather than social housing, which I think is a real Cinderella of public policy, because this is the sharp end. This is where you have low-income and vulnerable households just getting a roof over their heads at an affordable rent. Of course, you've got council housing, which is below market rent, and then you've got housing association housing provided by non-for-profit organisations, and that's what I featured in that package. But over the last 40 years, Pip and Mark, there have only been 3 years when we've actually built more social housing than we've demolished or sold.
Yeah.
So the stock of social housing is falling all the time. The council waiting list is getting longer and longer and longer, so people end up in temporary accommodation.
And, of course, we did have the situation, Margaret Thatcher making council housing available to buy, and people, you know, for understandable reasons, filled their boots with that and bought their own homes. But that was the start, really, of that huge reduction in what we used to call council housing stock.
Yeah, but Margaret Thatcher's government still built a lot more council houses each year than
we do at the moment,
the Blair-Brown era in 10 years, and the Tories from 2010 onwards. That we've hardly built any of these homes because the Treasury seems to have got it into its head that it's better to put social tenants in private accommodation and then pay their rent for them.
Yeah.
But we've ended up in a situation where we're spending £25 billion a year on housing benefit to pay for that, and often these private social homes, if you like, the landlords don't particularly look after the tenants have got nowhere to go, and you end up, look, I mean, we've just had announced yesterday serious failings or delay in social housing landlords. The Housing Ombudsman Service has reported that last year they quadrupled hundreds of families who are in accommodation where their health has been impacted.
Yeah, and we see these reports about mould
and things Dickensian.
like that, yeah.
But if you live in a council house, it's your house for the rest of your life, it's far more likely that you can maintain it yourself or you can do some of the work yourself. Of course, the council will often help you. But this model of just paying for people to live in private sector accommodation just isn't working.
Where are we going to be then in, say, 10 years' time if we don't get to grips with this?
Well, the National Housing Federation, which is the housing association's sort of umbrella organisation, they're saying the council house waiting list will go up by a third. But I think further down the line, because we've got, you know, so many 40 and 50-year-olds now, let alone 30-year-olds, who don't own their own home. And when they stop working, they won't be able to pay rent. So then they're going to need some kind of state-sponsored accommodation. This is the kind of tsunami of demand coming down the line. And that's why in my writing and broadcasting for many, many years, and in my book, Home Truth, I say, look, we just have to build more social housing, more council housing.
Is the other problem that the house builders, and, you know, there are not many smaller firms now, or family firms,
as we've discussed,
they just want to build executive homes because that's where the profit is.
They do, but they would build council housing if the incentive was there. The state says it isn't building council housing because the land's so expensive. But then I say to that, yeah, but the state owns 6% of all freehold land in the country, many of it in urban areas.
This is what they call grey land, according to Labour at the conference.
Many of it... Well, no, that's something different. Right, grey land is between Greenbelt and Brownfield.
Right.
So, no, this is something completely different. This is land that the state owns, but the Treasury, again, they're often a roadblock in this. They've been very reluctant to release that land for housing, even if it is council housing, which in the end would save money, because you save money if the state owns the house and houses the social tenant rather than paying rent to a landlord every year.
And what's also important is to make sure these houses are equipped properly for people who aren't able-bodied.
Sure.
So many of them aren't.
Sure. I mean, of course that's important, but that's just the cherry on top of the cake. I mean, we've got so many households in temporary accommodation now, or in, you know, bad private sector accommodation. It strikes me that we just need to build more council houses and housing associations. You talked about the right to buy there, Mark. The irony of that is, yes, quite a few council houses were sold off in the 80s and into the 90s. But the legislation actually said for every home that was sold, another one had to be built. But that legislation just fell by the wayside, and no council was ever prosecuted, and that was the problem. So we've diminished our stock of social housing.
Liam, thanks very much indeed taking us through that very important social issue there with that report too. But let's just return now to the Middle East. We're just going to bring you the latest pictures we're getting from the north. This is Nahariya looking towards Lebanon, because we have got these reports, as you can see the smoke there, of anti-armour missiles striking Israel, hitting the border village of Manara. But no casualties. That's the latest we're getting from the Reuters news agency.
But this is happening just as the US Embassy in Lebanon urges its citizens to make plans to depart as soon as possible while commercial options are still available. And there's reports that Britons are also being advised
Foreign
to get
Office
out.
are echoing that. Clearly, they want to get people to safety while the commercial flights are available. Fears perhaps that the security situation may start to unravel according to whatever happens in Gaza and elsewhere in Israel. But we'll update you as we get more on this situation in the north of Israel there.
Heading to Scotland now, where an entire town has been told to evacuate. Officials are warning that exceptional rainfall from Storm Babet is threatening to breach flood defences and hit infrastructure.
Well, it's already flooded towns and villages in Ireland, and the highest ever amount of rain to fall in a 24-hour period, according to Met Office figures, which is why the red alert is in place and perhaps being extended and even brought forward. Let's get the latest with Tony in Brechin, where I think you were saying, Tony, at least 350 households have been told to get to safety.
Yes, that's correct. On the call earlier on with Angus Council, they advised that they were making the decision from about 3 o'clock this afternoon to begin welcoming around 360 properties into the community hubs where they will be able to rest and stay safe. Those rivers are rising, as they say, and South River Esk and North River Esk are both seeing record amounts of rainfall over the next 24 hours. Now, I've been here in Brechin since about 7 o'clock this morning, and I will say that the Met Office description of this red weather warning of continuous and unprecedented level of rain and persistent extraordinary levels of rainfall is more than accurate. So I was down at the river earlier on today, and you know, there's quite starting, I think it looks like people packing bags into cars at the bottom of the town and certainly up the top. But I'm actually here in probably one of the busier parts of the town, though it doesn't look like it with the shot behind me. Behind me is the Burg Yard, where sandbags are being given out by Angus Council as a way to protect properties while this weather is ongoing. And to my other side, of course, is the Lidl, where people are stocking up on supplies and food so that they can bed in for the next few days. Now, we know that this red weather warning, as exceptional as it is, has been extended further south, almost right down to Dundee and Tayside, where the heavy rainfall from Storm Babet is expected to cause massive disruption. Now, we know earlier on that ScotRail has cancelled many a service from Aberdeen down to the south and the central belt of Scotland, and that includes from Aberdeen to Elgin, Edinburgh to Aberdeen, Fife, Perth to Aberdeen, Dunblane to Perth. You see the picture that's forming here, and it's pretty much in line with what SEPA advised everyone earlier on today and yesterday. Stay at home, do not travel. there is expected to be power cuts, there is expected to be further significant delays to roads travel, with all the surface water now starting to make an appearance on the roads here in the northeast of Scotland. And again, I like to echo the point that this red weather warning hasn't even really come into full force yet. It starts at 6 o'clock, so many will be wondering around Brechin and around Angus and the lower parts of Grampian, if this is it before the red weather warning, just what are we in for later on?
Tony, how are people where you are feeling about having to evacuate? Are they obeying the order?
It certainly seems that way, and I mean, I only had a couple of conversations, and certainly nobody, understandably, it's quite a traumatic time for them to be told that they need to leave their house, but, you know, they want to be safe, they want to keep their families safe, and at the end of the day, is this, you know, unfortunate and devastating as it is to lose, you know, property and to have your property flooded. They can do what they can, and certainly, you know, laying sandbags. Yeah. And Brechin here has some of the most kind of advanced flood defences in this part of Scotland, and they'll just be hoping that whenever they go back tomorrow, that's the best that they can hope for.
Tony, thank you very much for updating us. Stay safe, of course. Latest from Scotland coming up, and of course we'll update you in the Middle East as the Prime Minister leaves Israel, heading to Saudi Arabia. What will be next in the diplomatic round, we'll update you.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to ordinary people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life: your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle. Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's my new teeth.
It's your new teeth. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Good afternoon, it is 2 o'clock and this is the live desk here on GB News. Coming up this Thursday afternoon.
Fears that the tensions in the Middle East could spread. The US Embassy now urging its citizens in Lebanon to leave as soon as possible, with these pictures in the north showing that there have been some missiles fired from Lebanon into Israel. We'll have the latest for you on a moving situation.
I grieve with you. The words of the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, who's in Israel, as he meets the families of British victims and those still missing in Gaza. In talks with the Israeli president, he says Israel has a right to self-defence in line with international law.
And in the UK, a coach carrying asylum seekers to be accommodated on this Bibby Stockholm barge has arrived at Portland Port with, yes, more protests.
And an evacuation order in Brechin in Scotland as Storm Babet batters people's homes there. We'll have all the latest after your headlines with Rhiannon.
Good afternoon, it's 1 minute past 2. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. Rishi Sunak has welcomed Israel's decision to allow humanitarian aid into Gaza from Egypt, including £10 million worth of UK aid ready to enter. The Prime Minister held talks with his counterpart Benjamin Netanyahu and President Herzog earlier. Netanyahu thanked Rishi Sunak for his visit to Israel, calling it a strong statement of support in a time of darkness. Mr Sunak will fly to Saudi Arabia later, where he'll meet the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. He says today's talks have been productive.
I've had good, productive conversations with both Prime Minister Netanyahu and the Israeli President Herzog. Among other things, we discussed the importance of this conflict not escalating regionally and the importance of getting humanitarian aid into Gaza to help people who need it. I also had the opportunity to meet families of British nationals who have been taken hostage. We're doing absolutely everything we can to get them home.
The conflict has now killed almost 5,000 people on both sides on its 13th day. A warning some viewers may find the following images distressing. The Gaza Health Ministry says over 12,000 Palestinians have been injured in Israeli airstrikes and hundreds of thousands have fled their homes. Hamas media are reporting the head of the Hamas-led National Security Forces has been killed in an Israeli airstrike. UK Security Minister Tom Tugendhat says Palestinians in Gaza are being exploited by Hamas.
I think we've got to recognise that the first victims of Hamas are the Palestinian people. We've seen people in Gaza over the last 30, 40 years, not just murdered when Hamas took power in 2008-9, but actually since then being exploited in the most horrific ways. We've seen children being forced to dig these tunnels that sadly have been dug across the entire region. We've seen individuals who have stood against Hamas in various different ways being murdered.
The Foreign Secretary held talks with his Egyptian counterpart to discuss the ongoing situation in Gaza. James Cleverly visited Israel last week and will travel to Turkey and Qatar over the coming days to try and seek a peaceful resolution. The UK says the three countries are vital to international efforts to uphold regional stability, free hostages and allow humanitarian access to Gaza. In other news, French President Emmanuel Macron has attended the funeral of a teacher who was stabbed in a suspected Islamist attack. Dominique Bernard was stabbed to death 6 days ago in the northern city of Arras. Macron and his wife spoke to his family ahead of the ceremony, also attended by Bernard's students, each carrying a white rose. The suspect's under formal investigation for murder, and France has been on its highest state of alert since the attack. Back here, asylum seekers are returning to the Bibby Stockholm in Portland. A number of people were taken off the barge, you can see in these live images, more than 2 months ago after deadly bacteria was found
on board. The Home Office says all necessary tests have now been completed and food has been delivered to the barge. Concrete that could be at risk of collapse has been identified in another 40 schools and colleges across England. The Department for Education says the latest figures on the concrete known as RAC brings the total to 214. The last update from ministers in September had the number at 174. The Met Police has described new facial recognition technology to catch prolific shoplifters as game-changing. In a pilot of the new software, 12 retailers provided images of 30 of the worst offenders. When compared with the force's custody shots, almost half came up as positive matches. Those offenders are now being investigated with a view to build criminal cases. And an evacuation order has been put in place by Angus Council for all residents in the town of Brechin in Scotland. That's around 350 homes. It follows the rare red weather warning for heavy rainfall, severe flooding and severe wind for parts of Scotland. An amber warning for rain has been issued for parts of northern England, the Midlands and Wales. The British Geological Survey has warned Storm Babet could also cause potential landslides. This is GB News across the UK on TV, in your car and digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. Now it's back over to Mark and Pip.
As the US tells all its citizens to leave Lebanon, in Jerusalem, Prime Minister Rishi Sunak emphasised how important it is that the war does not escalate.
Hamas has perpetrated an absolutely barbaric act of terrorism. I'm sure many people will have seen the videos. They are horrific. They chill you. They certainly have done that to me, and everyone can see that they represent pure evil. And it's right that Israel exercises its right to self-defense. It has not just the right to protect its citizens, the duty to protect its citizens and ensure that something like this can never happen again. It's important that the conflict doesn't escalate regionally. That's why I'm talking to as many people as I can across the region. I've already done that, and I'll be able to see more people in person on this trip. No one wants to see this conflict escalate, and indeed the UK has sent various military assets into the Mediterranean to prevent regional escalation. So some of our surveillance aircraft, for example, are ensuring that arms shipments don't find their way to people like Hezbollah.
So, talking to as many people as I can. Well, that will include now Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman trying to shore up the diplomatic position across the Middle East. As, of course, we continue to see the violence. Let's get the latest with Charlie Peters, our reporter in Tel Aviv, where I gather the sirens have sounded recently, Charlie, and there have been the sound of explosions too.
Iron Dome intercepted several rockets here over central Tel Aviv in the last 90 minutes. We were out and about walking the streets trying to get some supplies earlier when the sirens went off right next to us. So as you often and we were ushered into the shelter with other people who were on the street. Spoke to some people there as we listened in for the explosions, probably the loudest we've heard in the last week, quite close to where we were. Each rocket fired by Iron Dome costs about $100,000, so they are expensive interceptions, and the US have been replenishing those stocks. The people here, they were in the shelter with us, they recognised that we were British, and there was a recognition of Prime Minister Rishi Sunak's visit here, especially the fact that it's a two-day visit to the region. They said that they were grateful for his statement of solidarity, but beyond that, in Washington, there's more than just solidarity being delivered in Israel. Defence Minister Yoav Gallant said in the last hour that the US had supplied some armoured personnel carriers. We've seen a photo released by the IDF of a US heavy lift aircraft at Tel Aviv airport with those vehicles, and it comes as significant warnings around the region are delivered to Israel and the US about this continued bombardment of Gaza, with the Iranian side in particular saying that it was prepared to launch further actions on the US and Israel if this continued work happens. As Foreign Secretary James Cleverly left Egypt this morning after talks with his counterpart there regarding humanitarian aid, King Abdullah of Jordan headed over, where he said that there were going to be discussions on how to prevent the Israeli aggression on Gaza. The region remains extremely tense with regards to the situation here. Will they, won't they? That invasion that's being mooted, the likely invasion of air, sea and land on the Gaza Strip, with significant protests continuing today across the region. We've seen US and Israeli and indeed British embassies targeted in Turkey, in particular in Lebanon, where there is that evacuation order for American citizens. Also in Baghdad, but crucially in the West Bank, where the uprisings have escalated overnight again, more people clashing, over 60 people detained on suspicion of belonging to Hamas, the IDF said this morning, and hundreds have been detained in the last week in their continuing policing operation in the West Bank. So very much a state of tension and rising violence across the region as this war continues.
Yes, rising violence across the region. What is the current assessment, Charlie, in terms of the risk of this descending into a regional war now?
Well, I think Western governments and the international players who have a focus and an interest in the region will almost certainly be considering their national evacuation orders, will be reassessing those plans. We know that the US has a significant military presence, of course, off the eastern Mediterranean. Britain does not have any aircraft carriers, but it does have, in a way, an unsinkable aircraft carrier by virtue of Cyprus, RAF Akrotiri there, and other sovereign base areas on that island able to project UK power onto the region, but also to extract people away from the Gaza Strip, Israel and the surrounding areas. That evacuation order from Lebanon is significant, and it will be seen and heard as a warning to other Western powers in the area of what the US considers to be a serious escalation in the risk in that country. Let's not forget, Lebanon in particular is in a dire state. Since the 2020 August Beirut port explosion, the country has been in a political, economic and financial turmoil, a complete crisis that it has struggled to escape from, and that weakened Lebanese state has allowed Lebanese Hezbollah to flourish, allowing the Iranian proxies and support from its groups such as the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps to supply armaments and men and more sustaining supplies into that region. And we're seeing the effect of that with more violence in northern Israel, shelling, missiles and gunfire skirmishes continuing day and night in the north.
Indeed, Charlie, in Tel Aviv, thank you for that. And as Charlie was just talking about that, we're getting Reuters news agency saying that the sirens have indeed just been sounding in the north of Israel, near that border with Lebanon. These are the pictures we've got of that area. You can see some smoke in the distance. There were reports earlier of what Israel described as anti-armour missiles being fired across the border from Lebanon, but no reports of any injuries at the moment. But clearly this is still a pretty fragile situation there in the north too.
Well, let's cross to our political editor, Christopher Hope. Christopher, good afternoon to you. You're back in London. Rishi Sunak continuing his diplomatic mission, meeting with Saudi Arabia. That's quite a significant meeting, isn't it? What could that achieve here?
Well, the UK is pulling in all its allies in the region to try and help deal with the escalating crisis in Gaza. Of course, there's big issues there with the two UK hostages the government's talked about so far. There could be as many as 7 more trapped in Gaza. So what we want to support, the UK wants some support in helping getting them to be released or find a safe way out. We're seeing escalation in the region at the moment. Of course, we've got the Foreign Office saying that British nationals should use commercial options to leave Lebanon if possible. And it struck me that in the clip we saw from the PM, Rishi Sunak, who's out there in Israel, of course no reporters with him on this visit because of security issues. The clip, he said, they used the word escalating and escalation at least twice. There is a concern, of course, that this could escalate into a wider regional conflict. And he did say there for the first time that UK surveillance planes are watching arms shipments to Hezbollah in the Lebanon. So clearly there's a risk right now of expanding turning into more of a regional conflict, and that's a concern of the UK government.
That's an important point, Chris, but we've perhaps forgotten that we've got our own assets out there, the RAF surveillance planes operating in that eastern Mediterranean area, and of course we've got a base on Cyprus as well. So it's interesting, the Foreign Office is echoing what the US Embassy is saying, or the US State Department, to these citizens: get out while there are commercial options still available.
And that's right, of course, that's right, Mark. UK Navy, some ships will arrive early next week, I understand. Then that could give us an option for some kind of sea lift, if required, from Gaza or from surrounding areas. But it does feel, doesn't it, looking into this weekend, where it's a crucial weekend, if this Israeli invasion happens, much speculation in Whitehall that the President Biden, on his way back to the US now, has been briefed about what the plans would be. And in that key bilateral meeting today with the Israeli Prime Minister, Mr. Sunak made it very clear to him that you must act within international law. Now, I asked his spokesman earlier in Parliament what that meant, and of course they said, well, they want to minimise civilian casualties, and that all hangs on that. If they can minimise that, do surgical strikes against Hamas, then that might work. But any wider civilian casualties will be a real problem for Israel in holding that international coalition together, Mark.
And should we reflect that, as well as Rishi Sunak, we've got James Cleverly, of course, who's in the air on this shuttle diplomacy. Qatar, we're told, Egypt, Turkey. We assume that is very much on the issue of the hostages, with an update on the numbers involved.
That's right, the update. So far, we know that 16 UK nationals are missing or dead. We know of that number, 7 have died, 9 are missing, 2 are being held hostage. The remaining 7, some are dead and some are being held hostage. Now, we know that the PM, Mr. Sunak, did speak to families of those UK hostages, 2 of them today on his visit to Israel. And we are told, we're not naming them for various reasons, and not least because we want to make sure that the best way to get them out is possible, and to keep their anonymity secure. But there could be others also, and we do know that other local countries are helping the UK government in those negotiations. It's very, very tense right now.
Chris in Westminster, thank you very much indeed for that. Let's take you back to these live shots we've got from Lebanon, just to update you. Some of the reports earlier suggesting that there had been anti-armor missiles fired into Israel from southern Lebanon, into northern Israel. You can see some smoke there in the distance. No reports of any injuries, but we do now have this warning from the US Embassy and indeed the Foreign Office for both American and British citizens to consider leaving Lebanon, with a worry that, of course, it could start to deteriorate there.
Joining us now is John Gentile, a military historian. Good afternoon to you. Thanks for joining us here on the live desk. Let's just start with that, shall we? What's going on this northern Israeli border with Lebanon? What's your assessment of the current situation? What with the US Embassy in Lebanon urging its citizens to get out? Things look like they are starting to deteriorate now.
Yeah, I mean, I think the northern Israel, southern Lebanon, and the threat that Hezbollah will show to these Israelis is not insignificant at all. Hezbollah has a very potent military force, and I imagine that Israel's biggest concern, if and when they do carry out a ground invasion into Gaza, will be what Hezbollah does to their north.
And, of course, they have experienced that before. One should reflect, perhaps, that Hezbollah suffered greatly in that skirmish, if we can call it that. But what is your estimate as to how Israel could fight a war maybe on 3 fronts, Gaza, Lebanon, and, of course, maybe the West Bank as well?
Yeah, one of the advantages, it'll be tough. I think the greater concern for Israel is the threat from Hezbollah in the north, not so much from activities by Hamas and other groups in the West Bank. What Israel has as an advantage is it has a central position, which is a military term, meaning that it can shift forces to the north and to the south if and when it begins its operations in Gaza. But again, I think that's Israel's biggest concern, is its northern flank.
And when you talk about ground operations in Gaza, I mean, I assume we're not expecting shock and awe as such, that this will be a gradual operation, a phased operation.
It's hard to know. What the Israelis do not have They will not be able to produce a strategic surprise like Hamas did on October 7th, but they can produce tactical surprise. And they have options. It looks like they're going to go in heavy and hard in the northern part of Gaza, into Gaza City and other surrounding areas. But how they sequence their attack, if they only focus on that part and then shift to the south, or maybe they do it simultaneously, I think that's what we're going to see unfold in the next couple of weeks.
And how ready and prepared do you think Hamas is? Do they have a lot of elite fighters, if you like?
Hamas has proven to be a very effective fighting guerrilla force. What Hamas has, and I think this will be a primary tactical objective with the overall political objective for the Israeli military to destroy Hamas, is they have to get after their tunnel system. That's the central nerve system, I think, for Hamas's ability to fight on the ground.
And it's massive, isn't it, that tunnel system?
It's massive, and it provides a lot of things for Hamas. It provides sustainment, logistics, resupply, command and control. It provides them the ability to move forces around, to fire rockets. So a key, I think, military objective for Israel will be dealing with the tunnels, because that, I believe, is Hamas's central nervous system. That's how they operate.
The armour, the tanks, Merkava tanks on the border there at Ashkelon, they will be fairly useless in trying to infiltrate a tunnel system. It's going to be down to individual specialist troops with hand-to-hand combat.
Yeah, I mean, how Israel actually aims to take down the tunnels is one thing. Tanks like the Merkava, like their infantry fighting vehicles, the Namr, can be quite effective in an urban area. They provide protection and a lot of firepower. And what those Merkava tanks can do is get Israeli ground troops close and into buildings so that they can start to deal with the tunnel system.
And just a last thought, what about the US? Because Charlie Peters, our reporter in Tel Aviv, saying pictures of US armoured personnel carriers arriving at Ben Gurion Airport there.
I imagine that those are equipment, APCs to resupply Israeli forces in case they need them.
So not direct US forces directly involved?
That would be a decision for the Biden administration. I mean, I don't think we're seeing that right now. It's clear that we've moved naval assets into the Mediterranean and a marine MEU, but with regards to U.S. actions in the Middle East and in this crisis, that is a policy decision for the United States.
Yeah, U.S. boots on the ground, a whole new decision, of course, as you say. Jen, thank you very much indeed for your thoughts joining us here on GB News. Thank you.
Just going to dip into a press conference that's going on in Tel Aviv, where the families of children held hostage by Hamas are holding this news conference.
Newly, age of 3, twins, and my 5.5 years old niece, Emilia. We woke up Saturday morning on alarms to bombings in Yavne and Rehovot as well. Immediately called them, asked how they're doing, if everything is okay. They say they didn't know anything and that they were just being told the terrorists are in the kibbutz, which wasn't even the first time that something like that happened. It's just something that they got used to live with. After half an hour, they wrote us in the family WhatsApp that they can hear the terrorists in their neighbor house. According to my understanding, people just heard screams from other house, gunshot, and then silence. And so I don't know if that's what they heard, but after another 30 minutes, they texted us that they can hear the terrorists in their house. They were in the safe room. And this safe room cannot be locked, by the way. So you have to just keep the door closed. They said, we don't know if we're going to make it. We love you. After 1 hour or so, and we are going crazy, feeling so helpless, unable to do anything, we try to call everyone we know that has some sort of a relation to authorities. And around 11, my sister sent a chilling voice message saying that they are burning the house and smoke is getting in under the mamad door, and they don't know if they're going to make it, and that they love us. 20 minutes later, she sent me text, 2 messages saying, "Help, we're dying." We had no idea what's going on with them for many hours after that. And evening time, we got a hold of David's family. They all lived there. And he said that the army went door by door and they were looking at the safe room and they couldn't find anything. The day after that, we saw David in one of the video clips that Hamas released, being carried on a truck of some sort. He was holding someone, I don't know if it was my sister's head or one of the twins. And we think we saw my sister Danielle and her daughter Emilia, but we don't know. It was from the back, so I don't know if to call it wishful thinking. A day after, we got in touch with one of the survivors who mentioned that during her kidnap/escape, she met David, Sharon, and one of the twins on that truck, and that David said that he was sure that he got out from the mamad with 2 babies. And he got into the truck when only one in his hands. And so that was last Monday. On Friday, we got an official notice that all the 6 are confirmed to be kidnapped. And that's what we know today as well. I'm joining the other families in saying that the conception that these are freedom fighters, this is not freedom. These are fighters, these are terrorists, and they are grabbing children, mothers, unarmed men, and they are doing God knows what to them at the moment. They need to get out of there now. Don't negotiate anything, they just need to release them, because otherwise they are lower than animals. Thank you.
Hello, this is a news conference in Tel Aviv with the families of these hostages. As you can see, the pictures of the children, as we heard there from a father, in terms of those Hamas terrorists, they are lower than animals.
My mother, my niece, my boy, Erez, 12 years old, my daughter, Sahar, 16 years old, my ex-husband, Ofer, 52 years old. 2 days ago, we celebrate my mom's birthday without her, yeah? We celebrate, and we had a lot of hope. She was 80 and a wonderful woman. Yesterday, we got a message that she and my niece, Noya, she have special needs, autism. They've been together. They've been murdered. We don't know. We think our bodies were, they've been murdered out of Israel. We think it was in Gaza. We don't know exactly the details. But now, actually, I have to sit 7 days and regret for them. But I don't have time, sorry, because I have to save my children's life and I have to fight for the children and elderly and the other citizen who's still alive. So I can't even sit 1 minute and have the moment to cry and to pray for them. Our kibbutz was had an awful massacre, pogrom, horrible hell. Our kibbutz is really disappeared. After the murder and everything, they burned all houses, most of the houses. We don't have home to go back. But I don't care about home. I don't care about my stuff. I don't care about my garden. I don't care about my albums. I don't care about nothing. I don't care about my clothes. I care for one thing, and I think this is the most important here. We have to release the children and the elderly people immediately. Now, I'm a simple woman. I'm not a political woman. I can't say what to do, but I'm sure that they must have a solution. They must make a solution to talk and to agree and to release them immediately. The time is critical, yeah? Every moment they're still there, they can find themselves, same my mom. She was alive 2 days ago. I don't want them to find the same, to be in the same situation. Every moment, it's huge danger for them. We have currently a very small window of opportunity now, and we must use it. And I can tell my story again and again, and I think we all have same, different, but quite same stories about the pogrom we had and how it's happened, you know. I've been in a different, because I'm divorced, I've been in a different house. I was all alone, 8 hours in the dark, without water and everything, fighting for my life, surviving when they're trying to go inside and break and smash all my house. But my 2 children been with my husband, and they ran out from the window and hide in the bush. And this was the last message I got from them at 8 o'clock in the morning. And just at 3 o'clock afternoon, when the soldier came, we could find out they are disappeared and realized that probably they are kidnapped. But stories we can tell. We have so many. Each one of us has a story, and a big story. Disaster stories. But what's important now is to act. I'm asking the whole government, Israeli government. I'm asking Qatar. I'm asking Sheikh Tamim, the prince, the Qatari prince. I think you have the power. I believe you can change this reality, this crazy reality. I'm asking United States, the European Union, France, my children and me and my husband, ex-husband, we are French citizens. My mom, she's American. So these children also quite Americans also. I'm asking France and America to fight like as it were their children. I believe they do it. Because a lot of international bodies all agree that this massacre and keeping civilians in hostage are a war crime against the humanity, against any human law. And it's not just our private business, it's the whole world problem. It's never ever happened before. These political people tell me. I'm a simple woman. I'm telling you what political people told me. It's never happened before. And I suggest, and I demand, you must get solution. You must stop. All parties should stop immediately any material operation, תתקן אותי אם אני לא אומרת נכון, act, until they release the children and babies and elderly and women and men. They must release them immediately and then make the war. You can't make wars at expense of children and babies. This is a world problem, it's not my problem. The whole world have to scream and to ask for humanity. And I think, and I pray, and I begging, and I ask even Hamas, this moment you have the opportunity to show that you still have humanity. So do it. And the government, stop fight, stop the military action. Military action, sorry for my English. And bring our children home. Now. We're waiting for them. We're crying for them. Every night we're crying and pray for them. But they're still in very cruel hands and merciless hands. Who can I trust? I'm asking the whole world and your voice to scream till the sky is open. Bring our children home. They are not soldiers, they are citizens. They've been picked by pajama from their bed, from their protect house. Can you imagine that? You're staying in your house, the most protected place, and then with your pajama you get murder or burn. A lot of families just disappeared. Families with babies and children are not here anymore. But I can't do nothing about the dead. I can do about the life. We have a
powerful, incredibly powerful appeal there from the families of children held hostage by Hamas. The lady you're looking at there, she has got a number of members of her family, children and parents who have been captured. And she's had a very simple message just then: bring our children home. She's made a direct appeal to Hamas to show that they have the opportunity to still have some humanity by releasing these hostages, now believed to be over 200 of them held in Gaza.
She is a French national. We do know that President Macron is on his way to the region, and indeed that Britain's Foreign Secretary, James Cleverly, is travelling to Qatar. She had that plea made to Qatar. You have the power. She said, we have a very small window of opportunity. She said, so far, words, words, words. Now, she said, was the time to act. We'll have all the latest from the region. Stay with us here on GB News.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to ordinary people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. There's only three people you can trust in life: your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Akweer, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle. Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's my new teeth.
It's your new teeth. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is two new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christys, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Well, welcome back to the live desk. We've just had that very emotional news conference with the families of those being held hostage. That was at that hotel in Tel Aviv with an impassioned appeal after words for action. The mother of some of the children taken saying we have a very small window of opportunity and indeed a direct appeal to Qatar. You have the power, she said, to actually intervene. Let's speak now to our political correspondent, Catherine Forster, because we know, Catherine, that the Foreign Secretary James Cleverly will be travelling to Qatar. We know that the Prime Minister has spoken to the Emir of Qatar on the line. It does appear that they may be key in trying to unlock this hostage situation.
Yes, absolutely. Qatar play a crucial role in this, and that is why the Foreign Secretary, James Cleverly, is heading there, having been in Egypt earlier. And we know too, don't we, that in terms of British nationals, there were 16 taken in that terror attack on October the 7th, among the couple of hundred that were taken in total. We know of those, don't we, that 7 are confirmed dead. 2 are definitely being held hostage and another 7 are missing, and we don't know whether those people are alive or dead. It is beyond imagining, isn't it, what these people must be going through. And of course, this is one of the big focuses of this diplomatic mission of the Foreign Secretary and Rishi Sunak, to try to get British nationals out, both the hostages that were taken from Israel and also British citizens or dual nationals who are currently trapped in Gaza, unable to get out ahead of what we expect to be a ground invasion of Gaza in the coming days. An incredibly difficult situation. There's estimated to be about 50,000 British or dual nationals in Israel and Gaza and the West Bank. We don't have any numbers on how many are in Gaza specifically and may be trying to get out. Of course, we know that Humza Yousaf, the Scottish First Minister, we know that his in-laws are there, unable to get out. His mother-in-law comes from Dundee. They are absolutely beside themselves. The government stressing that they are doing everything they can. But in the meantime, despite the news that Israel have moved on letting humanitarian aid in with President Biden yesterday, some 20 trucks of aid expected to go in tomorrow, potentially, but there's about 80 trucks waiting in Egypt to go in. Part of the reason they haven't gone in yet is, according to the Egyptians, that the road surface is not sufficiently good because Israel bombed the Rafah crossing a few days ago. So all ferociously difficult, but yes, a very moving press conference. Unimaginable what these parents and relatives are going through, who have had loved ones taken into Gaza and don't know what happens to them.
Catherine, thank you very much indeed.
Let's go back to Scotland, where an entire town has been told to evacuate as officials warn of exceptional rainfall from Storm Babet, which is threatening to breach flood defences and affect buildings.
Yeah, well, of course, the situation too is that we're getting an indication, the RNLI warning to people to stay away from the Scottish coast because of the winds, and all rail travel north of Edinburgh now cancelled, schools shut as well. Let's get the very latest with Tony, who's in Brechin. Tony, somewhat 350 plus houses now told get to safety, and we can see why.
Yeah, that's correct. Certainly not my finest hour out in camera today. But as you say, 350 homes, properties, being told that they are in the risk of severe flooding. Of course, Brechin, built along the bank of the River South Esk, one of two locations really pinpointed by the Scottish Government of being in severe risk of flooding. Now, earlier today we had talks with SEPA as well as Angus Council, and then it was revealed that that was the plan, that from around 3 o'clock today and into the afternoon, before that all-important red weather warning hits, and you know that the even worse weather than what we're experiencing just now. And of course 7,000 people here in Brechin, and many of them being told to get to either the community campus or one of the so-called evacuation zones. They're being advised to bring their own sleeping bags, supplies, medications. We were just outside the Lidl a little earlier on, and we saw a queue of cars going inside just to kind of stock up for who knows how long that this will last. Up on top of the hill, of course, was the community campus, safe from the flooding, but many will be wondering what they will be going back to once this red weather warning ends at around 12 o'clock tomorrow afternoon. Now, already in the last kind of 12 hours, we've seen the warning zone extend all the way up to South Aberdeenshire and then back down to Tayside and Perth. Now, Perth and Kinross, they've already dealt with some quite severe flooding, as has Brechin as it goes. And you know, Brechin has some of the most revered flood defence systems, and yet SEPA, looking at the figures and the rainfall expected over the next few hours, even they think that that will be stretched to the absolute limit, saying that the floodwaters will likely come to the very, very top, but yet flooding is still expected.
And Tony, we can see a vehicle with the yellow light flashing there behind you. Any idea what the local authority can actually do now in these coming hours to get people to safety?
Yeah, thanks for reminding me. I'm actually at the Burr Yard now, just where the locals are able to pick up sandbags. So Angus Council has certain of the number of these facilities around the Council of Angus, and since I've arrived here only 20 minutes ago or so, you know, I have seen a constant stream of cars and vans, people coming and loading up. And I would imagine that the idea is to, in the flood risk areas, that they're going to do their best to block any floodwater from entering and damaging their property before they make the trip up to one of the community hubs, where they'll bed in for probably a long and sleepless night.
It underlines how bad this is, Tony, not just looking at you in the middle of it, but also we're hearing that there's a potential for landslides across Scotland, according to the British Geological Survey.
Yes, well, that certainly wouldn't surprise me. Of course, as soon as you really get up past Stirling and Perth, the landscape becomes extremely hilly, and many of our main carriageways and roads cut right through it. I mean, we heard from SEPA and from the Met Office that we can expect, you know, some communities to be cut off altogether on top of the power cuts and the travel disruption.
OK, we're just getting an interference, Tony, on the signal for obvious reasons, but thanks for staying with us, though, in those atrocious conditions. Stay safe, of course, and we'll update people with the latest. But we do have now this statement from Angus Council.
They're saying that over the past few days, Resilience colleagues have been working with SEPA to identify areas at most risk of flooding due to the unprecedented level of rain that is expected to fall across Angus. SEPA have advised of a possible severe flood warning.
Well, they've gone on to say we've identified approximately 370 homes in Brechin and additional homes at Tannadice and Finhaven where residents will be asked to evacuate for their own safety. In addition to that, we know that ScotRail and other services basically are stopping at Edinburgh, nothing north of Edinburgh, and then the RNLI warning people to stay away from the Scottish coast because of the high winds. You could also see they're building up behind Tony. That could mean that they're literally blown into the sea. So it is becoming a very treacherous situation, and the warning's now being extended, as Tony was saying, further south.
Now, the Prime Minister has stressed its commitment to attempting to continue the flow of aid into Gaza as he met for talks with the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu a little earlier in Jerusalem.
And, of course, we had that news conference too just a few minutes ago in Tel Aviv with the families of those being held. The IDF believe at least 203 hostages being held in Gaza, including children, babies, women, and, of course, unarmed civilians. Well, the UK government has says that at least 2 Britons are believed to be among them, with 7 others missing. Well, let's speak now to human rights lawyer David Hay. And, David, of course, lots of the focus has been on the situation of the Palestinians and what's going on in Gaza. But let's reflect first on this hostage situation because, of course, they too have human rights.
Good afternoon to you both. You're correct. I mean, there's a multitude of international human rights laws in this area, and the hostage taking is against the law. It's the Geneva Convention, and both sides have breached that law. There are multiple other examples of breaches of international law here, but that's quite right. That is one of them.
What the basis of international law is. I mean, one of the things we keep hearing is that Israel, says the Prime Minister, for example, says President Biden, has the right to defend itself within international law. How do you stay within international law here?
Well, that's the thing. I mean, most of what that you're seeing discussed at the moment comes from a 1949 UN convention. And it's that basically the main prohibition in that armed conflict is banned. Then there are provisos as to when it's allowed, and one of them is obviously self-defense. So Israel is arguing that in self-defense, that's why there is now an armed conflict. And then that convention sets out various things that people in an armed conflict can and can't do. As you know, as absurd as that may sound in some ways, taking hostages is one of them. Collective punishment is another. That's one that a lot of people are talking about at the moment, because obviously they are saying that Israel is doing that against everyone in Hamas. They're punishing the whole of the territory. So there are lots of various elements in international law. And obviously, once they're breached, then it's how do you bring justice to those people and enforce it. And as we see,
I was going to say, is part of this complication the problem that you're talking about things like an entity of a state that signs up to these international agreements? The problem we have now is that Hamas, although it controls Gaza, is a prescribed terrorist organisation, not a political state entity.
Well, absolutely. That's one of the problems. But then, as we've seen with Russia, even when you had originally signed up to these, even states, the teeth of these conventions, whether it's the UN or other international law, it really isn't there. And that's one of the big problems. And as we've seen when we look at Putin.
When we heard earlier in the week from the UN, they were questioning the whole international law when it comes to telling people, Palestinians, to head south. They have said, the UN, that the forcible transfer of civilians, I think they call it, is against international law. How do you read that?
Well, again, you've got to give civilians that could be in collateral, in the zone where they're injured, notice, advance warning. But then it gets on to, is 24 hours enough? And then it comes down to all these legal definitions. So, I mean, from a human rights perspective, I would argue that it isn't. But you're going to see more and more of this, I think, as both sides battle this out effectively. It's also a physical war, but it's very much a propaganda one.
And we know exactly what Hamas did on October the 7th. From what you've seen of what Israel is doing so far, do you believe they are staying within international law?
No, I think both sides have already committed crimes. And again, you've got the issue with Hamas not being a state. So but both sides have most definitely committed war crimes. But as this creeps into other neighbouring countries, you may have other countries joining the war crimes. What we're also seeing as well, we've seen recently some NGOs in the UK and politicians saying that they will look to prosecute our politicians, like Rishi Sunak, if they're complicit in these war crimes. That's something that I'm seeing a lot of recently as well.
OK, well, David, thank you for your view on this, of course, and no doubt the international community will react once these events have finished. But we do have the assessment from Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister, who met Benjamin Netanyahu earlier, that Israeli leaders had the right and duty to respond with military action, effectively to go after Hamas. That was his assessment at those meetings earlier.
Let's just show you some live pictures from Lebanon. That's a helicopter in the sky, but we know that tensions are heightening by the hour on that northern border as well, as fears continue that this could descend into a regional war on many fronts.
Rockets fired from Lebanon into Israel earlier, armour rockets, although no one hurt. But the warning now from the US and indeed the Foreign Office for both US nationals and Britons to leave Lebanon while they were able to do so. We'll keep you updated, of course, here on GB News. Patrick is next with all the latest. Stay with us.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Ah!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sunday, the 29th of October at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you.